Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. The recent battle actions which are taking place, especially in Ukraine, have asked, a lot of experts, a lot of people have started asking the question about air power. What is air power and how are the stages of air power that come into place? We hear certain terms in strategic concepts like air dominance, air control, air supremacy, air superiority, especially when we talk about air battles and referring to fighter aircraft as well. I wanted to know what the difference is because when I read a lot of people talking about air superiority and so on and so forth, we find that there are very different opinions which are floating around amongst people who are talking about this. Who best to give us an answer on this subject than a former Vice Chief of Air Staff, Marshal Anil Khosla? Sir, thank you so much for joining me. This is a subject I personally have been wanting to kind of understand in depth, and I think it'll be a good opportunity for us to share the knowledge as well.
Yeah, thank you, Adi. It's always a pleasure interacting with you. And once again, you've chosen a very right topic in times of Ukraine war. You know, these terms are being used very frequently, and creating a sort of confusion in the mind. And let me add to the confusion by adding a few more terms. You named a few. Like I would say, one is air dominance. You must have read about air dominance. Then command of the air. Then a term used is control of the air. Then comes air supremacy, air superiority, and another term as favorable air situation. So we'll talk about these terms one by one and try and clarify the terms and the meaning of these terms. Yeah, Adi.
Let's begin, sir. What is air superiority? And this, along with air dominance and supremacy and so on and so forth, what does this whole conundrum of terms altogether, what are they trying to signify? And step by step, if you can take us through so that we can get clarity, sir.
Yeah. So let's start one by one on these terms. Each term has got a meaning, how what are the genesis of it and what are the meaning of it, what does it entail. So there is a method to madness, I would say. So first, let's start with air dominance. Air dominance is a very, very generic term, like you are dominating the domain of the air. It's like if I say, Nadal or Djokovic is dominating the tennis circuit, or if I say Tiger Woods was dominating the golf world, correct? So that is a sort of a generic term that you are dominating the air domain, and it doesn't mean that just by dominating, by having your name, that you're unbeatable. That moment you enter a contest, or a moment you enter a what do you call it? Game, that you won the game already. No, you have to fight for it. You have to fight for the title. You have to defend your title. But you are dominating the circuit because you are one of the best and you're unbeatable so far. And the genesis of this term actually started with the United States when they started their F-22 program. Okay, and fifth generation aircraft, F-22, F-35, and they called it air domination fighter, air dominance fighter. I mean, it's sort of that the technologically it will be so superior that it will dominate the skies. That's what it meant. That's how the term started. Now, even if you see the American sixth generation program, they're calling it NGAD, that is New Generation Air Dominance Program. Okay, so air dominance is generally sort of a dominating the circuit or the domain. Now, US approach, if you see, like the example if I gave you F-22 and then now sixth generation, so their approach is, technologically stay ahead in the game. That means you pump in all the best technologies in the aircraft or the platform in terms of stealth with the weapons, BBR, air radars, networking, survivability, multi-role. I mean, all sort of these things. And then by making such a platform, you stay ahead in the game. But that means that these platforms will still have to fight for that, getting that desired effect in the skies. So that is air dominance. Okay, now let's come to the next: command of the air and control of the air. So these two terms are actually a state, state in the sense when the war or skirmish is taking place or the hostilities are on, What is the state? Who's commanding the air? Who's controlling the air? The team A or team B. That is what it means. And command and control generally are these control of the air, command of the term, not new, very, very old. Even, old strategic thinkers had coined this thing, that one who commands the air, one who controls the air, wins the war and wins it very fast. Okay. Now, command and control both are used, but to my mind, they have a certain degree different. Command has got slightly higher degree as compared to control. Okay. So, and this is like applicable to not only air, it is also applicable to other domains like sea also. You call about sea control. That means the domain of the water, domain of the sea, who's controlling it, so basically what it means is that you allow your own forces to use that domain, whereas you deny the enemy the use of that domain. So if you call command of the air, that means I'm my air force and my is using the air domain, but enemy air force I'm denying the use of domain. So that is command and control of this thing. And I'll add one more point, Adi, here. It's not only the fighter aircraft. You mentioned fighter aircraft in the beginning. It's not only the fighter aircraft alone which decides the who's commanding or who's controlling the air domain. It is entire gambit of air power. Okay, fighter aircraft, combat support aircraft, radars, AD weapons, BVR weapons, long range vectors, networking ops, all facets of air power combined. They decide who's got the command of the air or control of the air. Okay, now comes the interesting part, Daddy. So we have decided that, okay, command of the air and control of the air is very important during war. Now, to what degree do you command the air or the control the air? Now these three terms come in: air supremacy, air superiority, and favorable air situation. Right. Now I want you to imagine a sort of a chart where on top you have these three degrees, air supremacy, air superiority, and favorable air situation. And on the vertical axis, you put three more things: area, time, and extent. All right. Now you have 9 squares, like a Sudoku grid, correct? So air supremacy is when entire area is covered. That means the entire airspace, and not only your own airspace, even enemy airspace. That the whole battle zone is covered. And time is entire duration of the war, hostilities. And extent is that I do not let the enemy even fly. That means he doesn't even get into the air. Now see air supremacy. That means the entire airspace is covered, your own as well as enemies. Entire duration of the war is covered, and there is no interference from the enemy. That is air supremacy. Okay, we'll talk about it more as we discuss further and various aspects of it. Now come to air superiority. In air superiority, now see the same three factors. The area may be limited. Okay, it may not be the entire airspace. It may be limited to certain geographical area. Time-wise, it may be restricted to maybe 12 hours, 6 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it is, and not the entire duration of the war. And the interference will not be nil, absolutely. There might be some interference from the enemy. It's not that the enemy is not flying at all or not using the air domain at all, but it is not prohibitively high. Okay, that is the second degree, that is air superiority. Now you come to favorable air situation, the third degree. That is much lower. This thing may be a tactical sort of a solution when the area is much more restricted, much lesser. Time duration is very, very temporary, maybe for that particular specific mission or a very few hours. And the interference, degree of the interference from the enemy may be slightly higher as compared to the other air superiority, but it is not as great that your success of your mission is gets jeopardized. So now you see the three degrees of control. So you have domination means you are trying to dominate the air all throughout even in peacetime, you're preparing and trying to dominate the air. Once the skirmish or the war breaks out, then you're trying to take over the command and control of the air. And depending on your objectives and your capability and your enemy's capability, you decide whether you want air supremacy, air superiority, or a favorable air situation. So that is how the whole gambit works, these terms. Okay. We will as usual in all our interactions, the first session is always slightly longer. So let me take a few minutes more on air supremacy and air superiority, because that will become, things will become more clearer. But that is the terms which are being used maximum. Okay, so let's see the first one, air supremacy. It is achieved when the entire enemy air power is neutralized. That means the entire enemy air power is not able to get airborne or use the medium of the air. Correct, as we said earlier. Now, uh, it is uh, it is a desired end state. That means it is a desired end state that whenever war breaks out, I should be able to control the air so much that I have total air supremacy.
Hmm.
Okay, it is a strategic sort of objective, and it takes time. It's not that on the first day itself you have achieved air supremacy and you put the enemy totally down. It takes time, and it takes to achieve. You have to orchestrate few campaigns. Some offensive, some defensive. Their campaigns are called OCA and DCA, that is offensive counter air and defensive counter air. I'll not go into details of these, but these campaigns have to be orchestrated to achieve this air supremacy.
Okay.
All right. As far as air superiority is concerned, as I said, it is ability to decisively control the airspace above the battle zone. Battle zone, when I say, it is not related to ground battle zone, it means generic term of war, that is your space as well as enemy's space, and deny that to the enemy. And it may be local or it may be temporary. But as compared to air supremacy, it is not the end state, it is the means. So what it means is a continued air superiority means air supremacy. I think I'm able to confuse a little bit more rather than simplify it.
No, actually,
Okay.
what you say
Now,
is makes a lot of sense.
and the methods of achieving air superiority or air supremacy or favorable, they keep changing with time.
Hmm.
And favorable air situation, you can compare it, like a tactical sort of umbrella or a bubble, you can say, which is temporary bubble where you have security, safety of your operating forces, and it is limited in space and extent, and so a sort of a tactical bubble, or you can say a sort of umbrella. I think these few aspects, if you keep in mind, I think clarity will be slightly better on these terms. Yeah, Adi.
So one thing that I realized, which you mentioned very clearly, and that's something I think would be the baseline to understand these things, and time and space needs to be considered when you're talking about these terms. I think that is one of the things which is missing in the dialect, if I may say so, which brings me to my next question about Ukraine itself. That's the hot war currently. The popular understanding and the commentary that we see from a lot of strategic analysts is that Russia has not been able to achieve air superiority over Ukraine. Um, some analysts talk about it in terms of eastern Ukraine and western Ukraine. Some analysts talk about battleground air superiority, and so on and so forth. How would you kind of explain us what is happening in Ukraine with the breakdown of these various situations that you've told us right now, sir?
A very valid question. These terms I've heard so many times now, that air superiority has not been achieved or the airspace is still contested. These statements are made very, very often in writings as well as in the discussions. So I got 5 or 6 comments on this issue. One is, firstly, it's a loosely used terms. As I said, one is used for the other. But if you understand the nuances or you understand the finer aspects of each term, then obviously the confusion reduces and you use the correct term for this thing. Now, the other factor which has come into why these terms are being loosely used is because of the recent, or I will not say recent, or I would say the general, wars or operations, undertaken by United States. Now you see all their wars here. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Kosovo. What is common in all these? Common factor is that your disparity between your air force, that means the US Air Force, and the opposing air force is very, very high. I mean, it's a sort of air supremacy is all given in the beginning itself. Iraq war, if you take, when the war started, the Iraqis flew their aircraft out to Iran, if you remember. So, I mean, the air supremacy is from beginning itself. So there is no enemy interference. So they're free to operate. Okay. Now that brings me to my second point, which is very, very important. You should listen to this. If you have, the degree of achievement depends on the parity or disparity of the opposing forces. Now, if the disparity is very high, like I gave example of US Air Force and the this thing, if the disparity is very high, air supremacy can be achieved very easily. True. But if the disparity is low, other person has also got equal power, it's also got aircraft, it's also got latest platforms, it has got latest weapons and all. It's not easy to get air supremacy straight away, or it will take long time, it will take long effort. So what do? You have rely on air superiority. That means you have fixed your objectives, and now based on that, you start trying to achieve air superiority for that time and space and extent. And at times, depending on your tactical objectives and other, you may switch between air superiority and favorable air situation. But if there's a parity between the two opposing forces, then even air superiority at times becomes difficult. Then you have to rely on more on favorable air situation. So what I'm trying to get at is, bottom line is that the parity or the disparity between the two opposing forces is a very, very important factor in getting whether air supremacy, air superiority, or favorable air situation. Okay, my third remark. Uh, Air supremacy, as I said earlier, that is nil interference. That means zero interference from the enemy. Takes a lot of effort and a lot of campaigning. Okay, now coming specific to your Ukraine remark, Russia is not aiming for that. He's called it special military operation. This is not a classic war where he wants to, dominate the skies throughout. He's not interested in that. That's why he's called it special military operation. Okay. Now, so what is Russia doing is, from to situation, he is trying to achieve his air superiority oblique favorable air situation. And in that process, under that bubble, under that security, under that safety, he is achieving whatever mission he is putting through. Okay. The next remark is, the whole warfare has become like as I said earlier, if you remember in one of the discussions, become like an urban jungle warfare, where Ukraine is following the tactics of air defense by shoot and scoot, shouldered fire, anti-aircraft weapons. Just fire and run away. You don't know any enemy doesn't know where is the fire coming from. Next time it will not come from the same place. Okay, so in this sort of scenario, where it is in the urban area and where you don't want to use too much of force, the achievement of air supremacy or air superiority also becomes very, very difficult. So this is a new sort of warfare. What I'm trying to say is the degree of difficulty is increasing with these sort of proliferation of these weapons. Okay, and especially with the restricted use of air power which Russia is using. Okay, next point is propaganda. All right. As I said, the first casualty is the information in a war, fog of war, and also propaganda, info warfare. So at the moment, the West is dominating the propaganda and is painting that the Russian might is not able to achieve air superiority. Okay, poor Ukraine, hardly any this thing is able to stand up against a big giant. So with this picture, it gets accentuated that Russia is not able to achieve air superiority or air supremacy. So this is the comment. The bottom line is, in any war, first you have to decide your objective. And based on the objective, you decide what your end state in terms of air I'm talking about. And then you shape the environment accordingly, whether you go in for supremacy is difficult in our context. Our enemies have got equal capabilities. And so either you go in for air superiority or favorable air situation, and you orchestrate the war accordingly. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. Now, before I sign off, I will make two more statements, Adi. One is, this whole gambit which I talked about so far in these two questions is not understood by many. It is not. So what happens is, they feel that the Air Force fights its own war. They are doing their own war.
Yeah.
Okay, of air dominance. What they don't realize is, what is very, very important, the sentence which I'm going to say is, if you don't control the airspace, if you are not able to command the airspace, if you're not able to get the desired degree of whatever air superiority, favorable air situation, your ground, your surface operations, when I say surface operations, both On the land and the sea suffer because the enemy is able to interfere. Okay. And so that is very, very important thing to understand, that control of the air is very, very important, not only for the air war, but also for the ground and sea warfare. Okay, so in the lighter vein, they say Air Force always fights enemies Air Force, enemies Army, as well as enemies Navy, all three. Yeah, Adi.
Indeed, sir, what you mentioned is actually very interesting, because when we talk about, or when we hear the discussions about the Ukraine war, especially about the Western discussions, and we see the concepts and the demands of warfare being put across, in the sense, this should have happened by now. This should have happened by now. And this should have happened by now. So, what we are doing is we are putting a demand on the particular style of warfare through our own eyes. And that's something that I pick up from your answer, uh, that each engagement is going to be different. So, there's going to be a different tactic. Coming on to that, sir, I mean, the next question is a bit challenging, and it does reflect upon one operation that India has also done, which is, I would call it, a restricted war, uh, which is what you also referred to in your answer, a special military operation being done by Russia. They've not declared war. They're not hitting everything which is moving in Ukraine. We had a similar scenario in Kargil, where
Yeah.
there was a restriction on ways and means of fighting that particular war. My question to you is, looking at evolving kind of a warfare in Ukraine, do you think today there is a need, not just for India, but for the world military community, to come up with sort of a doctrine or a study how to fight effectively using air power in restricted campaigns?
Okay, very valid observation, Adi, I must say. And I think you're fit enough to join the Air Force. Okay.
That's the guy.
Okay. Uh, Let me start with a comment. Like Russia in this case, we've been saying it all this time that Russia has not used its full might. It has not used its full potential, and not only ground, it not used its full potential of the air power.
Absolutely.
Reasons we have discussed earlier, I think, a number of times, in earlier episodes, that he doesn't want to go in for overkill, he doesn't want to go in for destruction, over destruction. They are his own people, after all. At one time, they were their own people. Long term problems may be generated, then public opinion, domestic as well as world opinion. So these are possible reasons why he's not used this thing. Now, it will be very interesting to see, like in the beginning, Putin said, that this is a special military operation, it's not a war. Then in between, he said, we have got nothing against Ukrainian people, or not even Ukrainian defense forces. And he's been saying, you please lay down the arm. In all the cities wherever he's surrounded, he's been saying, you lay down the arms, we'll let you go. Right? We're not interested in harming you. It is the policy which is, the NATO is following and using the Ukraine, which we are against. Correct. And now, if you see the latest statement 2-3 days back, which Putin made, is very, very interesting. He says the West is trying to say that we will fight to the last man in Ukraine. Please come. We have not even started seriously. This is, if you remember in the last episode, we discussed that maybe one of the reasons why he's not using everything is he's keeping it for a bigger enemy. And now he said that. He says, we're not even started seriously. That means all my might I'm keeping, I'm still preserving. You want to fight? Come. Okay. So keeping this in mind, it's a very interesting observation. So if you restrict the use of air power, what happens is your achievement of objectives, the cost increases. Okay, when I say cost in terms of three things. One is time. That means whatever objectives you have to achieve, they get delayed. If they could achieve it in 3 days, it will take you 3 weeks, maybe. I mean, I'm just saying generally. The second is cost of manpower. Your manpower losses increase. And not only air manpower, I'm talking about the ground surface manpower also. Your losses, the number of body bags increase. Okay. Third is the cost in terms of money, obviously, because you start losing platforms, you start losing equipment, and manpower loss is also sort of a monetary loss. So your objectives become achievement of objective becomes costlier in terms of time, in terms of manpower, in terms of money. Okay, so that is one thing which need to understand. And this lesson we have learned in our case also. If you see 1962 war and 65 war for that matter. Okay, we didn't use the air power or we didn't use it properly. Our objectives, I mean, it resulted in one war, it resulted in failure in 1962. And in the second one, it was not very convincing and the objectives were not achieved properly. Kargil, if you take, Kargil, we fought with one hand tied behind the back. For crossover, we will restrict it to POK. What happened? Our losses were high. Those people were sitting on, shoulder fired weapons on the hilltops and taking pot shots. So, what I'm trying to say is that we have examples of our own. 1971, if you take, the objectives were achieved so fast because the air power was given totally free hand. So we have examples of our own. Now, coming to your point about doctrine, doctrines are required. Doctrines are available for various things, but doctrines are generally broad guidelines on the application of air power. Okay, they are required. I'm not saying that they are not required. They are general guidelines. Okay, but the actual application of the air power is not a copybook, one size fits all solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is why I'm trying to bring out the bottom line is that depending on the prevailing situation, depending on who your enemy is, depending what his capabilities are, depending what is the situation, what are your objectives, what is your time frames, you have to think differently. And air power gives you a lot of options. Okay, numerous options. And it's a sort of art as well as science of orchestration of war. It's an art as well as science. So what we need to do is we need to understand the potential of the Air Force, and also we need to understand the way of application of these forces. Then you will be able to achieve your objectives quickly and properly. That is what I'm trying to convey. Yadi.
Interesting. So I think what you've said, and I agree with you, I think it requires a little more study and understanding before these kind of things are put into practice, and which result in non-required losses. I mean, we saw that in Kargil, as you very rightly bring out, sir. So, upper hand. Now, that is a concept that now, especially post China, kind of fingered us, came out as a discussion. Till now, it was Pakistan, and just the size difference gave a lot of confidence to the general public, saying, "Yeah, Pakistan to chota hai, dekh lenge." But then now we are faced off with a huge enemy, a huge adversary with 3 times the size of aircraft, the faster development of aircraft and stuff like that. And this is a unmentioned fear which is there in a lot of people in the general populace. This discussion does take place, and people do get, a little taken aback. My question to you is, till now, how is it that India missed this train? And do you see more and more people coming on board to understand that this is what India needs for the future?
Actually, Adi, you have thrown two questions in one, I think. One is regarding, understanding of the potential of the APAR, and what you're hinting at is that have we realized it and have we understood it? That is one part. And secondly, how to deal with China. So I think I will take on the first part. I think that's what you're hinting at, if I'm right. That means have we really understood and realized the potential of use of air power? Is that what you're getting at?
Absolutely, sir. Is it going to be, as what we are discussing today, the understanding of the requirement of this capability?
Yeah. Okay. Actually, you're asking me not only to finger the beehive or the wasp hive, you're asking me to jump into it. Okay, I will do though. So, but before I do that, let me put two things in perspective. And when I do that, what I'll do is I will compare the world scene and then in our own regional or a Indian context. Okay. First is you take air power. It's not very old. It is just about 120-year-old as compared to the land wars and the sea wars. It's a very recent or new phenomenon, 120 years old. But the potential and the rapid growth of it, you can imagine, after the first flight, within few years, a new service was born. That is
Mm.
the Air Force. Okay, and the progress has been phenomenal. I mean, you look at the platforms and the kind of weapons and the kind of features which have come in as compared within this short time. And obviously, the potential is unlimited. Okay, now world over, it's not an Indian phenomena only, it's world over. All forces, when I say all forces, I specifically referring to surface forces, that is ground as well as in the sea, that is army and navy. They want part of the air power to orchestrate their war.
Mhm.
Very rightly speaking, why not? Okay, but their utilization of the air power is limited. Why I'm saying limited is it limited by the tenets or the doctrine of their conduct of war,
Okay.
and whatever limited by the ground warfare or the surface warfare objectives. Rightly speaking, as far as they are concerned, it is one of the weapons with them, and they will like to use it as deemed fit for their kind of operation. But Air Force or the air power has got much more potential than that. So, having said that, world over, whoever can afford have got air arm of their own. Okay, now you take US. US has got four air forces: the US Air Force, the Army wing of the air, this thing, the naval wing, and the Marines. And each of them, assets wise and the quality of assets wise, are much, much bigger than a lot of countries in the world. Actually, recently the list was promulgated by the World Directory of Modern Military Aircraft. And in that, India is number three, and Russia is number two, USA is number one. But actually, if you go by it, the four positions are taken by the four air forces of the US Air Force.
True.
So you're getting my point. That means USA has got equivalent to four air forces, much bigger than many of the countries' air forces. But they can afford it. That's what I'm trying to bring out. In our case, can we afford it? We can have those ideas, but we cannot afford it. Till then, till we can afford it, we need to have our jointness, we need to have our integrated in some other way. Okay, that is one perspective. The second is all over the world, the air action is considered a normal thing. Okay, in our case, the air action is considered escalatory. Okay, border pay, you can keep shooting at each other, firing at each other, but the moment you use the air, that means you escalated. Thank God, after Balakot strike, this thinking has changed slightly, and we started using air power for
Mm.
such operations. So these two things I wanted to put in perspective. Now coming to your specific questions, that where are we as compared to understanding the potential of the air power and utilization of it? My answer to it is in the negative. In the sense, I will put my neck on the block, but I will say that no, we have not understood to the extent we should have done by now. But having said that, once is one thing we have accepted all over in the military realm as well as in the decision makers is the willingness to use the air power. That I will say that yes, that
Mm.
is coming. The second is the importance of the air power has been understood by all military as well as the decision makers. Third thing which is good has happened is, nobody is asking nowadays for assets or effort, but they're saying, okay, this is the desired effect is required. You carry on, you do whatever best is required, and we want this result. So, as far as understanding and acceptance is concerned, these three or four things have happened, which are quite good. But still, we are, mindset is to use the air power in a limited way, basically towards the ground objectives. Yeah. So as I was saying that you know that is a good acceptance which has come in, but still the mindset which is there is of limited use of the air power towards maybe limited ground objectives. Okay, and I would say to the extent I would say that still some mindset is there to use the air power like a airborne artillery. All right. Also, few utterances by very very senior officers, regarding the supremacy of the ground forces, air force being supporting arm, and I mean doesn't very give a very convincing answer to your question that the understanding is it correct or not correct. This thing at higher levels.
True.
All right. Third reason why I'm saying this is the reorganization which we are going through. Like theaterization, idea of AD command. You cannot separate offensive and defensive counter operations. I mean, these sort of ad hoc ways of reorganization also indicate towards sort of a not adequate or a poor understanding of the whole concept. All right. uh, to my mind, these are 3 4 indicators which indicate that we need to understand much more the potential and the application of air power as such. So I think I'll leave it at that and not stir up the honest nest a bit more.
What you're
Yeah,
saying is
Adi.
absolutely right, sir. Now, coming to China, which is a connected question, I mean, with the situation being where it is, we see a certain ramp up in the HAL. I don't want
Yeah,
to dance before the music actually starts, but there is a little bit of a change which we see. There's a little bit of a stride in terms of developing the indigenous systems. There's some deals which are happening with saffron and this and that. We see movement, sir. But we
right.
see movement right now when we need to dominate or we need to basically show our superiority towards against China. Now, how do you think this whole thing plays out?
Yeah, very rightly said. And earlier you had mentioned Pakistan also. So it's not only China, it's the collusive threat which we
Yeah,
have
of
to
course.
deal.
Now, yeah.
And if we have to go into the realm of how to deal with this collusive threat, then we have to go into multi domains, and that I think we already done that discussion. So in this discussion, what I'll do is I will restrict myself to the air domination or the air aspects of it.
Hmm.
Okay, so at present, comparatively, if you see as compared to China, our deterrence value is a bit on the lower side as compared to what actually is required. Correct? And when I say deterrence value, it is the combat capability as well as capability. When I say deterrence value compared to the threat which we are facing.
Hmm.
Okay, in terms of our air assets, the numbers is a bit low. Our combat potential overall is a bit lower than this. But and now you compare this with you mentioned China. Now, China is racing with USA and it's really marching ahead. It's really racing ahead of us. So in future you'll have disparity increasing. The disparity we talked about earlier. Okay, saving grace at the moment is, I'm talking about present days. I mentioned earlier, that World Directory of Modern Military Aircraft, they released their rankings in few months back,
Month back.
and India is number 3 in that, and China stands in number 4. So that is a what, and this ranking is given by the rating is given by not only the numerical strength, it takes a whole lot of factors into account. The war waging capability, your training, your tactics, your serviceability, all a whole lot of factors which go into making of air power, and then they give the rating. So saving grace is that we are still ahead of them, although only 5 odd points. But at the moment, we can make a difference. That's what I'm trying to say. The air power can make a difference. And as we say, the T3 advantage, which I've been talking about earlier, terrain, technology, and training,
Hmm.
against China. The technology, they are going way ahead. Actually, they've gone ahead of USA also. They're investing a lot. USA is worried actually. Terrain always will stay, but they're trying to overcome the terrain problems along with by better training and better technology. Whereas the training part, the third part, actually it calls training, but it also includes morale, tactics, and factors like we are way ahead and we should stay ahead in those. Okay, that is as far as now. We come to future now. Future is a worry. Okay, numerically, China is moving at a very, very fast pace. Their industry is doing very well. They have the capacity to ramp up their capability. The quality wise, the technology, as I said, they're investing a lot. Okay, the reorganization of the military is for the future warfare. Okay, the timelines are approaching 2049. They want to be world class and they think we're reaching the timelines quite well. The attitude at the moment is a bit aggressive, and you can imagine what sort of aggression they will display when they are fully world power, that is 2049. As far as India is concerned, they're not resolving the issue, they're keeping the pot boiling. Now, keeping these things in mind, now we need to, as you rightly said, we have gone from second gear to third gear, but we need to go into
Cruise gear.
fourth and the fifth gear. That is what is required. All right. Otherwise, in future, we'll have a problem. And when we say fourth or fifth gear, there are a host of actions which we need to take to meet the future challenges. But I'll just tag few of them. One is, time has come to spend on the military or spend on the air power, even at the cost of other developments. That is one bottom line. Secondly, we need to increase our capability and capacity to fight war. There is a subtle difference between capability and capacity. Capacity is the war fighting endurance, and capability is various capabilities like precision, standoff, and things like that. So there's a subtle difference between the two. And both of them combined make your deterrence value. How much deterrence value do you have? Okay. Then, as far as the air domain is concerned, we need to fulfill our shortcomings at the fastest. To name a few, fighter aircraft numerical strength, and not only numerical strength, balance between numerical and the quantity and quality, I would say, balance between them. Not only fighter aircraft, combat support elements, long range vectors, unmanned platforms, smart weapons, network solutions. I think we need to invest on all these space based surveillance. I think we need to invest in these to increase our capabilities. Okay, we need to invest in technology. That is also, we have stepped up on it. And, in terms of hypersonics, AI, robotics, stealth, sensors and seekers, unmanned platform, drones, swarms. So I think we need to, and rightly now all three services have started applying themselves as far as technology is concerned. And impetus is being given that they come into military domain in parallel to civil domain. So this is where we need to increase. And most important lesson, time and again, it comes up is during Ukraine war. It was come up again. We talked about earlier. Atmanirbharta, defense industry, capability to produce correct quality platforms and weapons at par with the world. That is what is required. And this, I think, we need to go into not fifth gear, maybe go into sixth gear, maybe with a booster. Okay. And last is, I would say again, whatever reorganization we do, we should not do for the sake of reorganization. We should do it with two things in mind. One is what is the priority, and second is, does it meet the future challenge or not? To meet the future challenge, rather than just for doing sake. So I think these 5 or 6 major points we need to look into and address. There are a whole lot of other actions also, but I'll not go into because we have discussed sometime or the other earlier on that. So I think today's discussion, we have been able to clear a little bit of our mind on these terms which are being used. Okay, how do we achieve them? And what is the importance? Why is Russia or Ukraine able to achieve or not able to achieve? What is the applicability in our context? Okay, what is the applicability now where we stand, and what is the applicability in future and what we need to do? I think we have covered these grounds in today's talk, Adi.
Thank you, sir, so much, because this thought came to me in a very funny sort of a thread that I was reading. This came out of sort of a spat that was taking place between a Russian Twitter user and a Ukrainian Twitter user. They spoke about us shooting down your aircraft and air superiority, and the counter argument was given: if you have air superiority, how are our fighters still flying in this and that? And that struck me to a little bit of a thought. I don't think anywhere it is mentioned that if there is air superiority, the other guy's fighters can't fly. Um, it's not complete control, it's not complete dominance, complete this thing as what probably the Americans had, as you mentioned in the first answer. So that's where the doubt came into my mind, and then I started reading and I got even more confused, and I said, okay, this needs some clarity. So I'd like to thank you, sir, that you've brought us this clarity. It's a very difficult topic to understand, and I think, as you mentioned, it needs to be understood a little more, not just by the public, but at the end of it, the level of the leadership as well. The recent actions does show a little bit of a hint, but it's a technical sort of a field, and I guess it needs a little more effort. But on this particular show, sir, thank you so much for clearing up so many doubts. We have another show coming up with Air Marshal Khosla, who's going to take us through space as a warfighting domain. That will be done shortly. Those of you who are watching this, please stay tuned for that one. For the space discussion, sir, and for your insightful views on that as well. We'll catch up with you. Till then, sir. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Thank you very much, Aadi.
Thank you, sir.